I'm going to share with you one of my deepest secrets. Okay, this is going to be a fun video, and it's going to be kind of a huge one in terms of the impact it can have on your mystery writing skills. We're going to break down one of my favorite episodes of Murder, She Wrote, The Last Flight of the Dixie Damsel, which is just an awesome episode in which Jessica Fletcher learns that the Dixie Damsel, the plane manned by her late husband Frank during the Korean War, has been recovered. She hightails it to the base as requested, but encounters a chilly reception. It seems like the Air Force is keeping something a secret. But this story is not the only thing we're going to be following in this video. We're also going to be looking into the ins and outs of my big murder spreadsheet. This is the spreadsheet that I use to keep track of everything I talk about on this channel, and I think that most of you who have been around for a while will not be surprised to learn that I am a bit of a spreadsheet junkie. In fact, I have so many spreadsheets that I actually have a spreadsheet to keep track of my other spreadsheets. I call it the list of lists. So I'm going to show you step by step how the big murder spreadsheet works and how it helps me understand the mystery genre and come to conclusions about the kind of possibilities that are out there for writers. It's not anything magical, but there is a bit of a process to it. The first thing I do when I fire up a new episode is I write down its name, episode stats, and a brief summary. In this episode, we quickly learn the reason for Jess's frosty reception at the base. Years ago, the crew of the Dixie Damsel had to abandon ship due to severe weather over the mountains. Although the plane itself disappeared into the storm, the crew was rescued days later. But not the whole crew. The flight engineer, Sergeant Gagliano, was never recovered. And it turns out he's been aboard the plane the whole time with a .45 slug in his chest. We now have a closed circle mystery, which goes right into my tropes column in my spreadsheet, along with cold case. A closed circle mystery is a mystery in which a limited group of suspects finds themselves in a restricted location. Our circle is limited to the men on the Dixie Damsel crew: Major Phelps, Colonel Goddard, Sergeant Dressler, and of course, Jessica's late husband, Frank. Closed circles are so much fun because they require you to deal with a very clear-cut group of suspects while somehow still delivering a surprise to the reader. If you love closed circle mysteries, you are going to want to join me for a workshop I'm running next Saturday, October 18th at noon EST. I am going to take 90 minutes and give you everything you need to construct a closed circle mystery, from choosing a amazing location, like maybe a Korean War era cargo plane, I'm just spitballing here, to filling that location with intriguing suspects, to delivering a killer twist that the reader is not going to see coming. This is a paid workshop, but the best part is that if you join, you'll get a coupon to get $30 off of my 8-week coaching program, Simple Mystery, when it opens at the end of October. All right, back to the video. The victim's family shows up to witness the investigation in the persons of Gagliano's daughter, Sylvia, and her uncle, Mr. Rossi. Sylvia is a bundle of emotions, none of them good. She still resents her father for the way he treated his family when she was a child, and ultimately refuses to take possession of the remains, telling the Major that the Air Force can do whatever it wants with her father's body. Most of the surviving crew members still have good relationships, all except for Sergeant Dressler, who's boorish, peevish, and just generally unpleasant. Suspicion starts to center around him, but the Major in charge of the investigation has a surefire way of getting to the truth. He subjects each of the surviving airmen to a polygraph test, and they all pass with flying colors. That means the only remaining suspect is Frank, Jessica's late husband, and she is outraged. She's determined to clear her late husband's name. Jessica is on the prowl for information, but the case takes a surprising turn when Sergeant Dressler is attacked outside a bar and nearly killed. Okay, if you've been following this channel for a while, I think you probably know exactly what this is. It's a cover-up crime. With the case about to be wrapped up, it seems certain that Dressler was attacked because he knows something. But what? Might he be able to point a finger at one of the other surviving airmen, or could he have evidence that would contradict the Major's understanding of the case? Either way, this goes right into my big murder spreadsheet under cover-up tactics. Dressler himself doesn't seem to have any idea of what sort of information he might have. But We get a clue when we find a car aboard the Dixie Damsel, which the crew was ferrying from Tokyo to Alaska for a general. The car's trunk isn't closing properly, and what's stranger is that there are 2 holes drilled into it. Jessica proposes that they might be air holes, drilled to allow a stowaway to board the plane and survive the long trip across the ocean. It's time to fill out a new column in the spreadsheet because we now have the motive for the crime. Jessica points out that Sergeant Gagliano wasn't wearing his parachute when he was found. At this time, airmen boarded the plane wearing their chutes, so now we know exactly what happened. The stowaway realized that the men were bailing out, and he killed Gagliano so that he could steal his chute. But who was the stowaway? We have no idea, and without a suspect, the major is still looking to pin the murder on Frank. Everyone is packing up, getting ready to leave the base, and Sylvia's uncle says she wants her father's duffel bag as a remembrance of her dad. That gets Jessica's sleuthing instincts going because it's a broken narrative. It doesn't match up with what we've been told. Sylvia didn't care enough for her father to bury his remains, so what does she want with his 40-year-old duffel? This broken narrative is the damning clue that brings this whole mystery to a close. It turns out that it's not Sylvia who wants the duffel, it's her uncle, Rossi. He and Gagliano smuggled raw diamonds out of Asia during the war. When Rossi ran into trouble, he had Gagliano secret him aboard the Dixie Damsel so he could make his way back to the States and escape. But when the plane started going down, the partnership was over. Rossi killed Gagliano for the parachute. Once he survived the crash and made it out of Alaska, he attached himself to Sylvia's family. It turns out he's not even her uncle after all. He's been lurking in her life this whole time, hoping that if the plane were ever recovered, Sylvia would be notified and he'd have a chance to retrieve his diamonds. We now understand our plot well enough to go back and ink in another column in our spreadsheet. What went wrong for the villain? Rossi had met Dressler in Asia and was afraid that he would recognize him. In fact, it's once I finally watch the whole plot that I can typically go back and fill in a lot of the blanks still lingering in my big murder spreadsheet. For example, we can fill in twists. Our plot has 2 of them, an extra person hidden inside the closed circle of the plane crew, and a double identity twist with Rossi pretending to be Sylvia's uncle. We can also fill in narratives, that is, the lies the villain has tried to maintain to preserve his illusion of innocence. And I also like to fill in this column called Where's the Villain, where I keep track of the villain's apparent role in the plot. Often, villains will show up as a potential witness, as a friend of a suspect, even as the victim himself. A lot of these columns on my spreadsheet don't bear fruit after every single episode. Rather, over time, they help me to build up a picture of the mystery genre as a whole. And keeping track of where the villain shows up is definitely one of those. It's helped me to really sound out the possibilities for structuring a good mystery. Okay, there are 2 more fields in my spreadsheet, and they're probably the most fruitful. First, inspiration. What is this column for? Well, it's for writing down those little bits of the plot that get under my skin, that make me imagine how the story might have gone down in another way. And for me, this episode has one thing that just keeps scratching at my brain, which is its motive: to get the last parachute. A moment before the plane was in distress, this villain and his victim were not at odds with each other. In fact, they were partners and friends. But the minute things get dicey and it was clear that only one of them would be making it to the ground alive, that's the moment that murder became inevitable. And it just makes me wonder what other kind of moments might have had this same result. Might a pair of friends find themselves fighting over the last set of scuba gear, the last antiviral? Might 2 friends find themselves on the hook for a murder they didn't commit and scrabbling to frame one another in an effort to remain free? How could I take 2 men who were united and in one instant set them at each other's throats? And our last field is criticism. Okay, maybe it seems churlish to nitpick an episode from almost 40 years ago, but criticism is part of how we learn. So what's wrong with this episode? What would I have done differently as a writer? Well, it's just one problem, but I think it's kind of a big one. This episode spills the beans about the stowaway far, far too early for my liking, at about the 60% mark. To my mind, only the crew was aboard the plane is a key narrative, something that, once it's disrupted, reveals the twist. In an ideal world, your key narrative remains utterly unchallenged until at last one clever sleuth has the imagination to envision a world in which it's not true. Keeping us in the dark about this key narrative would have allowed us to focus on other interesting questions. Could one of the suspects have beaten the lie detector? Could Frank actually be guilty? It would have forced Jess to ask some pretty awkward questions from people that she's been close to for years, and it just would have been very sticky and strained and confounding. But the minute Jessica Fletcher says air holes, all the tension goes out of this plot. The writers might have kept the car and even allowed the trunk lock to be broken, and that would provide clue support to explain the eventual solution. But they might have spared us this early acknowledgement that someone else was on the plane. One of my big philosophies about writing is that you can learn to do anything. Fight scenes, court scenes, epic fantasy battles. All you have to do is just look at how others have done it first. And I hope that at least some of you are now creating your very own Big Murder spreadsheets where you can keep notes on all the plots you enjoy and hopefully mine those notes for pure gold. This spreadsheet is exactly the tool I use to come to many of the conclusions I have about the mystery genre, including ferreting out the 4 damning clues that bring nearly every mystery to a close. I made a whole video about that one, so if you are looking for a great clue to bring your mystery to a delicious conclusion, you might want to watch that next. I'm also putting a link up here so that you can sign up for my workshop on closed circle mysteries. I have been working on the workshop forever. I am so excited to share it with all of you, and I hope to see some of you there.